Hi and welcome back to the Ruby Tuesday. Today we're diving into Hellboy, the Crooked Man, directed by Brian Tyler and starring Jack Kesy as Hellboy. Now if you're anything like me, when you heard that they were making another Hellboy film, you probably went, wait, really? Because the marketing for this was, well, practically non-existent. No trailers plastered everywhere, no major buzz, just a quiet little indie horror film sitting at a modest $20 million budget, and it almost seems like it was flying under the radar on purpose. But let me tell you, this movie works. It surprised me in the best way possible. Let's start by rewinding a little bit. The Hellboy franchise has had its ups and downs. Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy in 2004 and its sequel Hellboy 2, The Golden Army in 2008 were visual feasts. Del Toro brought a grand, epic, almost fairy-like quality tale to these films, with Ron Perlman absolutely owning the role of Hellboy. Then we had the 2019 Hellboy reboot with David Harbour, which didn't quite stick the landing. I liked David Harbour as Hellboy, but the film felt like it tried to do too much at once, losing the essence of what makes Hellboy special. And don't forget those animated films, I have them somewhere here, like Sword of Storms and Blood and Iron. Those captured a lot of the comic's tone, the kind of contained story that works so well with Hellboy's world. Which brings me to The Crooked Man. This movie, it's different. It doesn't try to be big or overblown. It's very indie in its horror approach, which makes sense because Brian Tyler, the director, is no stranger to working in smaller, more niche films. You might remember him from Crank, which is fantastic, a crazy film if you haven't seen it, or Gamer, again another crazy film if you haven't seen it. He's known for his frenetic and over-the-top style, but here Tyler takes a step back and brings a slow burn atmospheric horror vibe. It's a lot more faithful to the graphic novel of the same name, The Crooked Man by Mike Mignola, which is a short, contained, airy story in the Appalachian Mountains dealing with old-school witchcraft and haunting folklore. The cinematography matches the tone perfectly. The color palette is muted, a lot of earthy browns, grays, and shadows, really playing into the dark, almost grimy feeling of the environment. Then there's this suffocating sense of dread in the air, and it's enhanced by the way the film uses its environment. Dark forests, dilapidated houses. It feels like you've stepped into a forgotten part of America, which is exactly the point. Let's talk about Jack Kesy as Hellboy. He's a lot more restrained than Perlman or Harbour, and it works. He's not cracking jokes every second, but he's still got that sardonic charm. Kesy's Hellboy feels closer to the one that we see in the animated films, more focused on the mission, more of the brooding loner, more what's known in the comics. The budget constraints helped in this, I think, in a way, because this film doesn't rely massively on CGI set pieces. It's intimate, it's gritty, and when it gets to the horror elements, it really leans into it. So let's talk about the horror, or mainly the creature effects. And man, they're gnarly. The Crooked Man himself is horrifying. This contorted, nightmarish figure that just gets under your skin with his unearthly movements. And then there's some body horror that plays a big part in this movie. Hellboy's fights aren't the typical punch fest you'd expect. There's a lot of body distortion here. Body distortion, practical effects, and makeup that feels straight out of an indie horror flick, which gives it that old school creature feature vibe. It's practical where it needs to be, and when CGI does come into play, it's used wisely, not overpowering the rest of the film. There was a snake that was CG, and part of it looked great, and other parts not so great. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but with what it had, with the budget it had, budget-wise, I can forgive some bad CG in return for a decent story that is well shot. The score is haunting, it's understated, but it lingers. The music blends with the sound design, building up this eerie, creepy atmosphere that just feels right for a story like this. It's more about the tension than bombastic themes, which is exactly what a film like The Crooked Man needs. Themes are also interesting. We are dealing with classic Hellboy stuff, folklore, old magic, and Hellboy confronting these ancient evil forces. There's some talk about fate and destiny, and Hellboy is caught in the middle of these larger mystical forces. The way the movie plays into the Appalachian witchcraft and folklore really grounds it in a unique cultural setting. It's personal, it's isolated, and it doesn't try to do too much. It feels like a breath of fresh air in that respect, especially after the overblown mess that was the 29 reboot. And that's the thing, this movie feels like it could have been an animated Hellboy story, and I mean that in the best way possible. It's more intimate, it's more about the characters and the mythos than just the big explosion and fights. It harkens back to those earlier animated films where the focus was on the folklore and the horror. Rather than trying to make Hellboy into an action hero, it respects the source material. And as a fan of the comics, especially the Crooked Man story, I really appreciated that. So in the end, Hellboy the Crooked Man feels like the Hellboy film we didn't expect, but one that's better than we could have hoped for, especially after the disappointment of the last live-action movie. It's smaller, darker, and more contained, and it leans into the horror roots of the character. Honestly, I'd love to see more like this. If they can keep the indie horror vibe going and give us more stories like the Crooked Man, I think Hellboy's future on the big screen, or the indie screen, might be looking up again. So yeah, if you're a Hellboy or indie horror fan, give this one a go. It's got that slow burn folklore horror vibe that we've been missing in this franchise. I know many people are already hating on this one, but I urge you to give it a go and get past that mindset that Hellboy should be Ron Perlman. I don't disagree, but this was better than I expected, and maybe that's because I had massively low expectations already. Still, I think people might start finding this one in the ether of new VOD movies. They'll scroll past Hellboy and then double back saying, wait, what? There's a new Hellboy movie? And then give it a go and find themselves perplexed as to why nobody told them that this was coming out. And then, fingers crossed, word of mouth will do a better job than the marketing team did for this movie. I give Hellboy the Crooked Man 3.5 Nicolas Cages out of 5.
You got one.
Well, that's it for me. Let me know your thoughts down below. Did the Crooked Man surprise you like it did me? Be sure to hit the button, subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, remember, live long and Tuesday.